Built in the 1970s, with over $20 million spent over the last 4 years in upgrades. Let's find out if accessibility was kept in mind. Stay tuned till the end for the access score. The Manitoba Museum brings a lot of nostalgia to me. I have spent so many visits at this museum since I was such a young girl to my teen years with field trips at school. But this was my first time as a person with accessibility needs, and wow, was it an experience. My last visit at the museum was a visit with a lot of friends. I was starting to have accessibility needs, but I still walked the entire museum by myself with my own 2 feet. It was a new experience for me, and this is why we chose the Manitoba Museum to do this very first review for this new series. The Manitoba Museum was built in the 1970s, and I want to preface this because the reality is it does create a lot of challenges for the museum, and I do understand that the fact that the museum is so old and the infrastructure is obviously a huge barrier to them doing a lot of things, and I want to acknowledge that before I say anything negative. The Manitoba Museum needs to do better. We were prepping for our visit to the museum the night before. I was going through their website like I would any outing that Luke and I are prepping for, and I was quite disappointed in the information that the museum has under their accessibility tab. It is quite sad. The museum has decided to place not only the wrong information on this tab, but simply government jargon. And this website is supposed to be accessibility friendly, and not only information that me, as someone who's planning my visit, information that I need. The information that is on this page does not only not tell me whether or not the museum is accessible, but also doesn't give me any information to prep my visit. The only information it tells me is which entrance is accessible, does not tell me what parking is available and where I should really park, whether there's accessible parking, and or whether there's handy accessible parking anywhere near the museum. Halfway through the page on the website, there's a link to their main accessibility plan, and on top of that, it's 2 years out of date. I was flabbergasted when I went through the page. I just cannot believe that a non-for-profit, I've worked for non-for-profits, this accessibility plan by law needs to be kept up to date. And I was just absolutely floored that this is the state of their website at the moment, considering the massive upgrades they put through the museum. Once we finally got to the museum, we didn't really know what to expect, unfortunately, because the website didn't really give me much information. The parking situation is a little lackluster. Most places in our downtown Winnipeg usually has at least a few city parking spots that are dedicated under accessible. Unfortunately, the Manitoba Museum does not have any of those. The implied parking lot that's attached to the Manitoba Museum that we parked in doesn't have any accessible parking spot. For a museum, you'd expect to have at least a couple. The ramp into the museum, unfortunately, needs some work. It is, of course, our lovely Manitoba winters do a lot of damage on cement, so I'll give it up to the museum. They have tried to do their best to keep that ramp in the best condition they possibly can. It needs to be redone. It's just one of those things that my chair, which is quite frankly, can handle just about anything, it handled that ramp fine, but with a little bit of silt and a little bit of snow, if we were to redo that in the winter, or had we done that museum in the winter, I guarantee you we would have had some major issues. Getting into the museum, the buttons were fine, pretty standard accessibility in mind, no major issues there. Everyone was super friendly. The main greeter was awesome, helped us to make sure that we had everything we needed. Upon arriving to get our tickets though, one thing that because of the website situation, I had read in their accessibility plan for 2 years ago,
There was a plan to add an accessibility ticketing system where they were going to add a lower desk so that people in wheelchairs would have I would say a better experience when purchasing tickets. Unfortunately, when we arrived, that wasn't the case. However, with the Accessibility Act and all of the changes in the Accessibility Act that has happened in Manitoba over the last couple of years, and the emphasis with the Manitoba government and the federal government, I'm a little shocked that they would have put that on the back burner. I'm a little bit intrigued as to why they decided not to do that, considering it's literally on their plan for 3 years ago and it's still on their website. Once we purchased our tickets, which quite frankly, the gentleman was very nice, I did ask him though, whether or not they had any audio tours. Though I don't personally have any auditory issues or visual issues, I was just curious as to the amenities for the museum because we were doing this review for you guys. Unfortunately, there is no Braille in the museum or any audio-visual tours currently for the Manitoba Museum, but there is something in the works, which I was happy to hear. I think it's something that the museum should be working on, and it's incredibly important. And so I'm happy to hear that they are working on adding a tour. My concern with that being said is if they're working on something that 3 years ago they still haven't done, I don't know how quickly this is going to happen, but happy to hear that someone at the front desk already knew that it was in the works and that they were able to tell me that. And so I hope to see that in the near future. Now to the museum in general. I am happy to see that quite a few of the exhibit that I've absolutely loved as a child is still very much still in the museum. There are certain parts of the museum that are still there that I could do without. That, you know, it'd be nice to see the 1970s go and see something revamped. I would like to see the Manitoba government spend a lot more money on our Manitoba Museum, and it quite frankly needs it. The upgrades we've seen over the last few years has been really impressive. The upgrades to the non-such and the few new galleries and upgrades to the galleries have been really impressive. The technology side of it, quite frankly though, a little less impressive. This is just old, so. The captions are non-existent. The new videos are unimpressive. They're lacking in the accessibility side of it. There's either lacking captions on audio files.
America to trade with several First Nations. They returned to
No captions.
Or there's no audio on caption files. And it's like, it's just, there's no accessibility kept in mind with all the brand new exhibits. And I was just so disappointed when I saw all of this. The new exhibits are absolutely stunning, of course, from a visual perspective. Now, the content, on the other hand, I could talk to you about for ages. I'm not going to get into major detail about it because I would love for you to go to the museum and make your own opinion on it. However, I would have loved to have seen the Winnipeg section, which is one of the new exhibits or the new sections within the museum. There's not even a section on the 1919 strike. There's so many sections of our history that isn't even touched. And I'm personally just kind of disappointed in that. Speaking of the Winnipeg exhibit, there is a beautiful sub-theater within this exhibit, but unfortunately there's no cutouts for people in wheelchairs and or additional rows that it be in the back or anywheres. And so unfortunately I had to just put myself at the end of either side, essentially took up an aisle, and people just felt awkward trying to get around me, and it just made for a bit of an uncomfortable experience for kind of everyone around us. And so from a seating perspective, I wish they either essentially created a back row where people with strollers, myself, could essentially just kind of put ourselves. There's something that needs to be tweaked because it was fairly awkward. Now, when it comes to bathrooms, because we all need bathrooms, the accessibility was pretty fantastic. There are 2 main bathrooms in the museum. There's one right in the middle in the non-such area, right in the middle of, smack dab in the middle of the museum, and there's one at the entrance or at the end, depending on where you're at. Unfortunately, the main one is accessible, but not fantastic, 1970s and all. But the main non-such bathroom is absolutely beautiful. It's the fully renovated one. It's the one that got renovated when they redid the non-such area. And it's fully fabulous. I have to say, the only sticking point I will point out is the fact that the door to the bathroom is still a pull door. I wish people were to use the button doors more often, and I wish that door was a button door. I know it's fully accessible by law, I get it. However, it being a button door would just go that extra step that I wish it did. Nope, not a chance.
Well, I'm kind of glad they didn't tear out the entire old city, because quite frankly, this is like my favorite part of the entire museum. Even if I can't access any of it, it's like my favorite part. Like all the entire old prices and like the old section, I just love this part. They can't take out the Allen Theater. I can still see it. I can still sit here and watch Chaplin.
The last but not least is the wonderful signage of the museum. This is something that went through a massive upgrade when they redid all of the signage for the upgrade of the museum. They redid all the exit signs. I'm assuming this was probably for fire code, but in the process, they redid all the mapping for all the new areas, and they redid all the maps, redid all the wayfinding, all of this stuff for the museum. Now, this was a good thing for the most part. However, the wayfinding for the museum was quite confusing.
No, because you see this and then you think you're going the same way. Oh yeah, people love throwing coins in there.
There are certain areas that, from my understanding, are either not completely finished. If they are finished, they're confusing.
Slightly confused, but we are now in the brand new prairie section. So let's see.
There are little nooks and crannies areas in certain areas that are just so tight from a chair perspective.
Oh, I fit.
And so I hope that in the next phase of construction or the next phase of development, the museum takes wayfinding a little bit more seriously. Overall, I still love the Manitoba Museum, and it still brings back a lot of nostalgia. But as a person with accessibility needs now, I see the museum in a completely different light. And unfortunately, that means that the museum just has a little bit of a different meaning for me now. And that means I think they just have a lot of work to do before I decide to go back to the Manitoba Museum. Now, if you guys are interested, take a screenshot or pause the screen so that you can see my access score of the Manitoba Museum. And I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. We'll be doing an entire series on this topic, and we'll be sharing with you some other accessibility reviews of different museums across the province. I hope you guys join us for more on this series later this year. If you'd like more slow roll, check it out over here.